Thanks, Martin. I just, as an aside, and before I jump into the next piece, if anybody's interested, through the day, we actually have one of the new Category A life jackets here. It's a fairly, let's say, high priority subject for us, but if anybody wants to kind of see it, speak to me or one of the team through the day, and we can give you a chance to have a look at it and give you a bit of an introduction to it, because certainly in the next 4 to 6 weeks, lots of your guys and girls at site are going to be getting to see it in real life. So if you want any help on that, we're happy to do so. So what I'm going to talk about is kind of the challenge of organizational learning. This kind of slide gives us a sense of what I think the problem is. As human beings, we're really, really good at starting new things and are undertaking a new project, a new activity, or something kind of that we think is quite important to us without tapping into the experience that's gone before us. You know, Judith Hackett, 9 months ago now, at the breakfast at Offshore Europe, said there are no new accidents, there are just new victims. No new accidents, just new victims. We've got a hydrocarbon release performance that sets a set of expectations that we reduce it by a further 50%, and yet last year we saw a 19% increase. The reasons for that 19% increase are exactly the same as we've had continue for the last 15, 16, 17 years. So there are no new hydrocarbon releases. It's new releases for old reasons. So there's a whole challenge for us as an industry and as individuals in terms of learning. How do we apply learning, and where does it come from? So reinventing the wheel, gilding the lily, or polishing the proverbial is something that we don't particularly embed beyond the need to make a difference. So I kind of want to put some challenge into the room around what does organizational learning look like, what's the benefit of it, what's the purpose, what's the intent, and what are the obstacles? What are the things that get in the way of, for each of us, and I'll include myself in this, to stop us accepting the gift of knowledge, be it good practice or incident information, and ignoring that and carrying on and repeating the same mistakes. So that's the kind of frame that I want to give you today. Context. How do you want to use your time? Do you want to spend all your time dealing with things that are going wrong and a little bit helping things go right? Or on the other side, do you want to spend time helping things go right? Investing at the front end, that balance, so that the things that go wrong are less frequent, have less impact. I would argue that we'd all want to be on the right-hand side. And that's quite difficult for me because I'm looking backwards and trying to make sure I've got it right for you. And of course, it's wrong. So there's the challenge. So how do I help you help things go right? How do you use your time to make things go right? High-performance organizations, high-reliability organizations build learning into their process, into their business. Learning is not something you do after the event. It's part of your process. It's part of your continuous improvement piece. It's an embedded and an intuitive thing that builds over time. As an industry, we're not there. We're very, very good generally at sharing, but we're not particularly good at doing anything with the sharing of information. So when you think about learning and organizational learning, you need to kind of focus on just 4 things. Do 4 things well, and you have this opportunity to change your construct for organizational learning. If you want to relate this just to you as an individual, you can. When you look at this at an individual level, an organizational level, and an industry level, it's equally applicable. So you can't just look at where you sit in relation to this learning kind of piece. So the 4 key elements. Firstly, you must have supportive leaders. Now that's not really a surprise. In almost everything we do, A supportive leader is, or leadership culture is the most important thing. Leaders are committed to organizational learning. Not committed to organizational sharing, but doing something with the information. Learning only occurs if you do something with the information you've got. Yeah. If you do something with it. There has to be clear vision, clear goals for learning, and the leaders in your organization must champion it as role models. They must set the tone, set the context. There must be, for organizational learning to succeed, there must be a culture of continuous improvement. Now, that's not about constant step change. That's about continuous iterative process of being better, accepting that there's always room for improvement and recognizing that nothing's ever finished and nothing's ever beyond criticism, and being open to that, being open to the feedback and being open to the possibility that you can learn from somebody else, a guy or a girl at site, another industry, another country, whatever it is, and putting that into context. You must have values and beliefs that support that, but you also must have incentives that reinforce it. And incentives are not necessarily about, if you learn this, we'll get you a new iPad or another jacket with something embroidered on the sleeve. Incentives are about how we're performance managed, what's in our goals and our personal objectives to embed learning in an organization. It's about driving, incidents down, production up, and all these things into a sort of common space of practice. And you must measure the results. You must measure the results. So how do you know you're learning? Is, have we done anything with it? When did we do it? What's the impact? And where do we see that being in 2, 3, 4 years' time? Because it takes time. It takes time for it to embed and get into the depth of the organization. So you must think about how you measure the impact of your learning. A defined learning structure. You need people in your organization to have responsibilities for learning. You must have people. If it's an afterthought, it won't get done. Everybody's busy, everybody has a day job, and therefore it has to become part of the day job. You have to have responsibilities for capturing, distilling, applying, and sharing knowledge. I said earlier that sharing we're quite good at. We can see from even this past week on the Step Change website where somebody put a post up about a set of Honeywell safety specs that are delaminating. Now, there are at least 2 companies in this room who are really interested in that because they have a variant of the Honeywell specs and they want to know what's going on. But the person who shared it only shared enough information to say he's done something. Those that want to learn or use that don't have enough information to know if it impacts them. So thinking about how it impacts somebody else and how they need to use it is really important. And that has to be part of the process. How do you capture all the things that are available so that somebody can go away and do something really useful with it? The other thing is that learning doesn't necessarily happen on databases and online portals. They exist and you can develop them. We've got Sadie. And it almost works almost all the time if you put stuff in it. But you're equally likely to learn over at the coffee stand or at one of the events or at the water cooler and just getting together and sharing good practice and kind of what's going on in that. So that human interaction, that storytelling, things that went well and things that didn't go well are equally important in terms of the learning in your organization. So you need to create constructs beyond the IT solution so that people still come together. Because you will not learn from a database. You'll learn from a story, you'll learn from emotion. But the database gives you at least the foundation on which to build. But you can't take people out of the equation in terms of transfer of knowledge. You will listen to somebody who will tell you a war story. You might not do anything with it, but you will definitely listen to it. And in the hope you'll go away and do something in the end. And a process that works. Clear process. Clear steps in terms of where, when, how, what's important. What's important to share? It's not everything. Everybody's busy, so what are the 3 things that you want somebody to go away and do differently? You need to tell them. Because if you don't tell them, you're just going, this is big, this is difficult, and it'll be like another piece of step change guidance, 40 pages, lands on your desk and you don't know what to do with it. So it's about setting the tone and setting the direction in that process that enables the end user to do something with it. Enabling the end user creates the opportunity for learning, creates the space for learning. So that's the basic construct of what you need to do in an organizational level. And if you think about that just in your kind of your own space, an intervention is an opportunity for learning. Somebody stopping the job, raising a stop card or a behavioural safety card or whatever you've got, is somebody going, here's a piece of knowledge and I would like to share it with you. Now, the standard answer is not always the answer that's most welcome, because it usually ends in off, and it's not always welcome. But that's about somebody creating an opportunity to learn. So as an individual, you have to kind of be open in that space to receiving that learning, receiving that gift of knowledge. You add that up to an industry that has 60,000 people offshore in any given year, 26,000 core workers, and a population onshore directly employed of something like 250,000. How do you create that learning environment? How do you create that space that we stop having old accidents and new victims? And that's the issue, that's the challenge we face. How do we move from, low numbers of incidents, but ultimately the same people or different people getting hurt for exactly the same reason we've had for the last 5, 10, 15 years. Martin talked earlier about the lifting guidance. That's the 3rd or 4th time we've updated that. Why is lifting still an issue? The mechanical joint integrity. We've had mechanical joint integrity standards for 15, 16 years. And we still have to improve and update. What is it that we are not doing to embed learning? What is it we're missing? What needs to be improved? And it's all part of this process of where's the culture? Where's our culture for learning? We have a really good culture for creating new stuff, but we don't have a culture for using old stuff. And that's what we need to, there are no new things to learn. There are just new ways to embed it. So some of the gaps that we think exist. First one is goals. So do we have, or do you have in your organization a goal for learning? Do you have a goal that says, as an organization, we will apply 10% of all incident learning shared, 100% of all incident learning shared, or we will share 100% of our incident learnings? Do you have that? Do they exist? If you have a goal, of course you can measure your performance against it, and the goal supports the mission. So that's the first gap. Do we have a goal that actually measures and supports learning? Incentives. Why? Why bother? We're big, we're perfect, I'm Norwegian or whatever, therefore it must always be better. Then why do we need organizational learning? How do we promulgate? How do we move things forward? So you need to kind of incentivize. You need to create the incentive and the space that rewards continuous improvement, rewards sharing, and rewards doing something with the lessons that you share. On any given week, I must get between 10 different safety alerts from different organizations, from Step Change, from Marine Safety Forum, from different organizations. Now, I don't have time to read them all. You don't have time to read them all, I suspect. But what happens if one of those is absolutely pertinent to the job you're going to do tomorrow? And by reading it, you might stop somebody having an accident. That's the opportunity in incentivizing learning. It's stopping somebody getting hurt. It's making sure somebody goes home. And Where is the gap? In our busy lives, how are we incentivized to do something with the data? How are we incentivized to share it? And then finally, what's the process? We don't have very many processes for sharing learning. We have even less process for demonstrating any form of lessons learned. We can create a lovely PowerPoint that says, here's the incident, here are the 5 or 6 things that went wrong, and here's what we think you should do about it. That is not lessons learned. That's lessons identified. Lessons learned is what happens when something's changed. When something's changed, when something's improved, when the process is improved, when the design is improved, when the training or the human factor elements are improved, then that's when the lesson is learned. Not when you send the PowerPoint. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't necessarily change things. It's up to us to change that. That's what we try and do in step change. We try and do that for everybody, for the collective 60,000 that works in a major hazard site. But how do you do that at an individual level? How do we give you these gifts that create that value? So, now I'm going to tell you what I think the problem is. And the bad news, it's us. And I'm going to kind of hopefully explain why. So here we go. Here's this good practice or guidance, or that incident, near miss, or identified lesson. Or you could call it the third toaster on your wedding list. Yeah? It's the thing you don't really want. You know, you're going to put it on eBay as soon as it's something that gets in, something that steals time. It's something that you have to do something with. Because if you don't do something with it, then what's the point? So what are you going to do, is it, with a gift? And there's kind of 2 ways of being in terms of the gift. And the first one is responsive. So if you think about responsive, what does it mean? Let me go back. So responsive is about being open, okay? Kind of, and to use some of the terminology, it's kind of being out of the box and being kind of open to receiving something. Kind of having the time, having the inclination, having the process, having the incentives, having the goals to do something with it. And then there's where I think most of us are most of the time. And that's the resistive box. I don't want it, and how can I get rid of it? So step change has given me this new piece of guidance. How do I get it off my desk onto somebody else's desk as quickly as possible? Or the HSE have done this, or somebody else has done something to you. Yeah? And therefore, it's about how you move it, how you move the problem. How do you get rid of that kind of lessons learned pack that's been sent out? So if you're responsive, the great thing is you're not defensive. You're focused on results and helping others. So you see this as a gift. You see this as an opportunity to improve your results and make sure everybody goes home. It also helps you be informed about how you can be better. And ultimately, it means you're always looking for ways to improve. Now that's where we'd hope to be, in this responsive space. But in a world of time pressure and other commitments, competing commitments that say, I need to do this in this organization space, it creates some challenge for us. But if we stay in that space, what we believe is this is the virtuous circle. So if you're open to receiving this gift, then what will happen is people will continue to share, they'll continue to kind of give these gifts, and we continue to have the opportunity to improve. So the top half is a circle of continuous improvement. So you can think of this as the virtuous circle, the good place to be. If you're down the bottom, there's kind of 2 positions that we think you're in, generally speaking, if you're in this kind of resistive space. So you're better, okay? You're better than the latest piece of industry guidance, or you're better than, the guy that's just taking the time out to intervene and say, you've done something wrong, or you could improve that. You don't need to learn because you've got 35 years experience and somebody who's just, as green as grass has just come up and told you something. So if you're better than, you've got this kind of superior, important kind of way about it. You're right, you're impatient, and you're indifferent to kind of what they're doing. And you might hear, it's excuses. So I don't need it. I've got one of those already. It's not as good as the one I've got. It's the wrong colour. It's brand new, so it can't be any good. But you also might go, I must be seen to be doing something. So you kind of do it with a bit of a lack of enthusiasm. You know it's there. You know it's kind of what good looks like or what we think good looks like. So you jump into it half-heartedly. So these are very easy excuses to throw into the kind of challenge of organizational learning. And I can unfortunately tell you that on more often than, I've been in the better than space. About 2 years ago, Chemical Safety Board came over and asked me and some of the other folks around Step Change, did we think Macondo could happen in the UK? And I was in Houston when Macondo happened. And I went away and went, no, I think, our culture, when you think about culture and leadership and everything else, my answer was, no, I don't believe it could happen in the UK. If I could wind the clock back 2 years ago, I would say, whilst I believe we have a much better legislative culture and much better set of leadership culture and process, the conditions that exist at Macondo could equally exist in the UK. But I believe we were better than. So it's very easy to jump into that resistive space and go, no good for me. The other thing is the second position. So you're not as good. And that's equally challenging. So if you're worse than, you're inferior, deficient, you're helpless, you're jealous, or even bitter, Goodness me. So you don't have time to use it, do you? You're far too busy. I couldn't possibly use this because I'm far too busy. Why would I want to take something into my business that might make it better? So you have to have an excuse. It's going to cost money. So it can't be good if it costs money. It's too complicated, it wasn't made for me, or I wasn't involved. A whole bunch of guys in suits like Martin and Dave and me all decided to get together and create something that we think is better. You feel worse, so it's much easier to go, well, I wasn't involved, so I'm not going to play. And there's the kind of challenge in that. It's one of the reasons why we're trying to change the planning model, so there is more involvement. But that kind of two positions, being better or worse than, creates obstacles and barriers to learning in an organization. Think about that in a basic intervention. Even a hold the handrail intervention. When somebody tells you kindly to hold the handrail, what's their position? What's their position in telling you to hold the handrail? Are they being responsive? Are they going, I want to help, so I'm going to ask you to hold the handrail. Because if you do hold the handrail, there's a fair chance you'll make it down in one piece, you'll go home and spend time with your family, which is actually much more important than being here at work. Or are actually intervening because they think they're better than, and they need to tell you they know the rules better than you, and therefore they need to demonstrate that they know the rules better than you, and they are going to tell you they know the rules better than you. Both of them are true. Both of them create the intervention. But one of them is virtuous and one of them is vicious. Because if somebody tells you to hold the handrail from a kind of better than space, you'll pick up on it very quickly. And you might hold the handrail, but there'll be all sorts of little voices going off in your head, and they'll not be thinking kind thoughts of that person. Add that in terms of organizations and individuals. And we invite people into this. I was having a good chat with the TACA guys up at the back there earlier. And we were and I kind of behaved slightly badly because we talked about HR in its fondest sense. And of course, it's very easy to invite people into that kind of who we think HR is, or accounts is, or HSE, or the safety professionals. So we invite people into this collusion, we're better or worse than, and we kind of create this space at an individual and then at an organizational level. And that's the challenge that we face. How do we stay in the responsive box long enough to do something with it? That's partly about process, but it's also about how we relate to people in terms of our own way of being. So, and unfortunately, what's the point in sharing if nobody reads them? What is the point of sharing my lessons, sharing my hard-won and hard-fought emotional scars if none of you guys take the time to read them. What's the point? If any of you guys want to share an incident learning, how many times are you going to do it? The first time you'll do it in the hope that somebody does it. The second time you'll do it in kind of knowing full well that somebody may or may not read it, and then you'll just stop doing it. So we kind of only have 2 or 3 chances to get this right in terms of learning. And it has to go beyond the basic process of just sharing. We have to be set up, if we want to learn and we want to share information, we have to be set up in the responsive base to receive that learning. Otherwise, that learning will continue to have new accidents, old reasons, and new victims. So it's about getting out of that circle. And ultimately, that's the last time we give anybody anything. People step back, they disengage, they walk away. And the gift is gone. The gift of learning, the gift of good practice, the gift of knowledge, be it incident or anything else, is lost. And we all go back to our silos, and we all go back to starting a project with a new set of information and reinventing the wheel. So think about that in terms of its context. So I'm going to come back to this. So how do we spend our time? Do we spend our time dealing with things that go wrong or helping things that go right? And I'll give you some idea of what helping things go right looks like, because it's not just this big nebulous box down the bottom. So the first thing to help things go right is we have to teach and communicate. Okay? We have to teach and communicate. That's about education. Then it's about listening and learning. Then it's about building the relationship, be it an individual level or beyond that at an organizational level. Getting into this responsive space. And then ultimately building relationships with those that have influence. And when I mean those that are influence, don't sit and criticize Opito for writing rubbish standards, because we write them. They publish them on our behalf. If the standards are wrong, it's because of us that they're wrong. We have the opportunity to engage, to participate, and actually make a difference. So if there's issues there, they're our issues. And that goes for all sorts of things. We have the opportunity to influence. And if you have the need to correct, look at the pyramid of influence and look at what you've not done. So if you've had to correct, have you taught and communicate effectively enough? If the answer is no, there's a fair chance that you haven't listened and learned. Because if you don't know what you're trying to teach and communicate, you haven't spent the time listening, learning as to what somebody needs. And if you haven't spent the time listening, learning, you've probably not built the relationship with the person or the site or the organization that you're trying to work with. And if you haven't built the relationship with the site, then you've got no chance of building it at an industry level. So the solution to the problem at the highest level is almost always the one immediately below that. So if you've got a teaching and communication issue, you've not listened and you've not learned. MIST's a really good example of that. Really good example. 9 modules to 6 modules. We were teaching MIST with a great degree of success. 100,000 people have been through MIST. It must be successful. Must be successful. But of course, we hadn't really effectively listened to some of the feedback. We haven't learned and we hadn't had the opportunity to feed forward. So we can see in doing that and solving, in correcting MIST, we have to go back to listening and learning, going back to what we're trying to achieve. So I just kind of want to end on this. Question we have in Step Change, as Les, as any one of you guys, or as an industry, are we reinventing the wheel? Are we genuinely making things better, or justifying our existence and creating new versions of the same old thing? Are we adding value? Are we creating the opportunity for a brighter future? Or are we all going home and fulfilling 6 things in our objectives because that's what we're saying to do, and learning's not part of them? Thanks, folks.